You're not real cops," I shouted as two men in knockoff uniforms shoved their way up to my porch at 6 in the morning. They barked that I had just 24 hours to clear out or I'd be arrested. And across the street, watching like a vulture, stood Patricia, the HOA president who'd been grinding me down for months with bogus violations. She wore that smug little grin, waiting to see me break, but when my front door opened, her expression collapsed. Color drained from her face. Whatever she saw standing there was worse than any ghost. At 65, you'd think I'd be past this kind of nonsense. After a brutal divorce, I thought I was settling into a quiet retirement in my Maple Street home. Instead, I found myself stuck in the middle of neighborhood politics that felt more like a crime syndicate than an HOA. It began small, like it always does. Patricia started handing me citations for the most absurd things: grass an inch too high, a garden hose left coiled wrong. But then she somehow dug up details that no neighbor should ever know. Exact permit numbers from renovations during my marriage. Contractor names I never shared. Even the window model numbers I installed 3 years back. That chilled me to the bone when a notice showed up citing my cedar deck, complete with the original permit ID from city files. I knew this wasn't casual harassment. Someone with real access to official records was feeding her my information. And Patricia wielded it with surgical precision. The pressure wasn't just personal. It was financial warfare. $800 demanded for a landscape redesign, $1,200 for a structural. Report on a deck already approved. Add up the penalties and fees, and suddenly I was staring down nearly $5,000 in supposed violations. On a retiree's income, that wasn't just irritating, it was devastating. But here's the thing. 30 years as an insurance adjuster had taught me one survival rule: document everything. So that's exactly what I did. Every citation got photographed with a timestamp. Every voicemail she left went straight into a file. I built a case folder thicker by the week, treating this HOA nightmare the same way I used to handle fraudulent claims. My son helped on weekends, stacking papers, labeling envelopes. "Dad, this isn't neighbor drama anymore," he told me. "This is evidence." He was right. And as the weeks dragged on, the harassment only grew stranger. Patricia tossed around legal terms she didn't understand, rattling off phrases like covenant acceleration completely out of context. Neighbors I'd known for years suddenly turned cold, repeating the same robotic excuses: property values, community safety, immediate resolution required. It was as if they were reading from a script someone handed them. One neighbor, Judy, a teacher, leaned over the fence one evening and whispered, "David, this isn't HOA procedure. I've seen abuse patterns like this in domestic cases. What she's doing feels organized." Judy's words grounded me. I wasn't crazy. Something deeper was happening here. And then there was Leonard, the ex-security guard on Patricia's board. He showed up during inspections, reciting her citations with hands that trembled. His eyes kept darting her way, like he was afraid to say the wrong thing. I could see the conflict in him, a decent man trapped under her thumb. Even stranger, my elderly neighbor who walked past every morning became linked to small acts of sabotage. Sprinklers broken, fence posts loosened, garden systems failing without reason. The timing always lined up with her strolls. I didn't want to believe she was behind it, but my gut told me these weren't coincidences. So I documented that too. Every photo, every note, every timestamp. Because one thing was becoming clear. Patricia wasn't just acting petty. She was running something coordinated. And whoever was feeding her inside information, they weren't done yet. Property value impact assessment. Community safety protocols. Immediate resolution required. That's not how normal neighbors talk about a backyard spat. The campaign went digital, and whoever was behind it had real technical skill. Within minutes, identical posts about my property would pop up across neighborhood apps. Same angles, the same cropped photos, the same professional-looking edits. The talking points matched word for word. It wasn't random trolling. It was a coordinated influence operation using my own neighbors as pawns. People who used to wave at me now crossed the street. The few who spoke clung to the same scripted lines about property, values, and community safety, delivering them with visible discomfort. Judy noticed it first. "David, I've been saving these template messages," she told me over the fence. "They all have the same grammar mistakes." Her teacher's eye picked up subtle, repeating errors, identical apostrophe abuse, the same odd sentence rhythms, the kind of fingerprint you only see when someone has been copy-pasting a script into other people's mouths. Then the sabotage started to look surgical. The breaker for my irrigation controller tripped under a light load. The GFCI by the side gate had fresh tool marks. My smart timer logs showed gaps like someone had cut power long enough to scramble the schedule. After the third incident, I put up a cheap daylight camera, nothing fancy, and that's when I caught the pattern on tape. A professional-looking person in work clothes using my elderly neighbor's walking route as cover to approach my property. Someone was hiding behind an innocent routine to mask deliberate vandalism. The real turning point came by accident. I was in the front yard when Patricia stepped into her driveway and started talking on her phone, loud enough for me to hear. "Need property acquisition completed before final rezoning vote and public announcement. 6-month timeline is firm," she said. That phrasing stopped me cold. This wasn't HOA gripe language. It was business talk, acquisition schedules, investor pressure, deadlines. Patricia wasn't ranting about a mailbox. She was talking about closing a deal. She even mentioned my development partner and someone named Tom Bradford getting impatient about the schedule. Once I heard that, everything snapped into focus. This wasn't petty harassment anymore. It had the contours of a planned acquisition: push the owner out, depress value, force a sale. The identical grammar mistakes across complaint letters became my smoking gun. When I laid out every neighbor complaint on the dining room table, the same misplaced apostrophes and recurring misuse of legal terms lit up like neon. It looked exactly like one person drafting documents, then having others sign them without reading. Fraud investigations are built on patterns, and this was pattern-perfect. My son helped me sift through the mountain of evidence on his weekends. "Think like you're building a case file," he said, and we created timelines, cross-references, and a folder system that would make any claims investigator proud. The more we organized, the more the scheme revealed itself. Emergency assessment letters sent only to me, legal-sounding notices that implied authority Patricia didn't have, threats about mortgage notices and liens designed to trigger panic. These weren't the moves of a cranky volunteer. They were the playbook of someone who knew exactly how to apply financial pressure for maximum psychological impact. So I started digging into public records, thinking, if Patricia had inside info, maybe the trail would show up there too. What I found almost made me drop to my knees. City planning documents flagged our neighborhood for commercial rezoning, a final vote scheduled in 6 months. Professional valuation tools confirmed what the planning files hinted at. My corner lot, listed at roughly $320,000 as residential, could skyrocket into the millions under commercial zoning. I ran the numbers 3 times before I believed them. Suddenly, Patricia's urgency, her investor talk, her scripted harassment made brutal sense. This wasn't about a crooked HOA leader with a personal grudge. It was a timed acquisition play with a tight deadline, outside pressure, and a clear financial motive. Once you see the pattern, the pieces fall into place. Coordinated social posts, staged sabotage, identical complaint templates, phone calls discussing acquisition timelines, and city plans that would turn one quiet corner lot into a gold mine. Everything I documented, every photo, timestamp, and odd phrasing started to look less like isolated incidents and more like evidence of a professional operation aimed squarely at me. She wasn't trying to collect HOA fines. She was trying to steal a multi-million-dollar payday right out from under me. Patricia was trying to terrorize me into selling my house at residential value, even though she knew the lot would be worth 13 times as much after the rezoning vote in 6 months. City Council minutes showed the final rezoning vote scheduled exactly 6 months out, with a public announcement to follow immediately. That deadline explained everything about Patricia's ramped-up campaign. She had a hard cutoff to get the property into her hands before the market exploded. Once the rezoning became public, everyone would know the land's true commercial value and lowball offers would be impossible. Her 6-month countdown wasn't random. It was a business timetable. The deeper I dug, the more Patricia's side of the puzzle made sense. She held a real estate license and could access MLS databases. Combine that legitimate access with public planning documents, and you can reconstruct exactly what she knew and when she knew it. This wasn't insider tips from city employees so much as savvy, professional research, data anyone with the right tools and know-how could assemble. Tom Bradford's name kept popping up in property records as Patricia's business partner. Bradford Properties had a history of snapping up commercial lots across the county. The pattern was disturbingly simple. Identify parcels slated for rezoning, pressure vulnerable owners into selling at residential prices, then flip the lots for massive profit once the commercial approval was announced. Patricia was the neighborhood face of a much larger acquisition machine. Those small fines and compound penalties weren't meant to bankrupt ME, they were meant to manufacture stress that made a quick sale look like the only option. She even offered to mediate the HOA issues if I agreed to accept purchase offers from community members at current residential values. Suddenly, her talk about immediate resolution and community-supported solutions had a clear motive. Push me to sell for $300,000 now when the lot would be worth millions in 6 months. My mortgage company began getting letters about alleged violations, the kind of notices that trigger loan reviews under maintenance clauses. Those letters were written in professional legalese that an HOA volunteer wouldn't normally use. Someone with legal know-how had a hand in this. Once you add it up, scripted complaints, targeted financial pressure, staged property evaluations designed to depress perceived value, the playbook is obvious. Leonard's behavior finally made sense too. An unemployed former security guard facing money trouble is exactly the sort of person who could be persuaded by promises of consulting work or a cut of a big payoff. He wasn't malicious in the cartoon villain way, he was desperate. And Patricia exploited that. My son's weekend visits became essential. "Dad, this is bigger than neighbor drama," he said after reviewing the rezoning documents. Together we organized timelines, cross-references, and folders of evidence. The pattern emerged. Professional-looking assessments arranged to show decline, structural issues flagged that required costly repairs, and rapid-fire notices designed to create panic and force a sale. These weren't impartial evaluations. They were tools of psychological and financial coercion. Patricia escalated next. She turned neighborhood dissent into legal theater. She organized a so-called covenant enforcement proceeding at the community center, complete with recorded minutes and scripted parliamentary procedure to give the event an air of officialdom. Citations were read aloud, references to Covenant Section 12.4b, and threats of lien placement and foreclosure initiation, language that far exceeded the HOA's real authority. Leonard stood beside her like a man led to his own execution, This wasn't petty revenge. It was a coordinated, deadline-driven acquisition campaign, and the clock on my corner lot was already ticking. He kept stumbling over Patricia's script, losing his place, swallowing words, his eyes refusing to meet mine. Property maintenance violations requiring immediate remediation, he read, his voice shrinking with every sentence. Then rattled off escalating penalties and threats of lien placement and mortgage notifications. It wasn't the steady, authoritative tone of the security guard I once nodded to on the street. This was a man reading words that clearly didn't belong to him, nervous, uncomfortable, borrowed lines. My adjuster's instincts snapped to attention. The paperwork had the wrong municipal codes, expired ordinance citations, and legal phrasing lifted out of unrelated statutes. It looked official at first glance, but under the surface the documents were a mess. Unauthorized language, mismatched references, fake authority. After 3 decades spotting fraud, I could see the red flags from a mile off. Patricia wasn't enforcing rules. She was manufacturing paperwork to make her scheme look lawful. The biggest shock came when I compared the HOA bylaws she was brandishing with the county-filed originals. She'd quietly added enforcement powers that never existed, tacked on penalty schemes outside the HOA's authority, and invented procedures that ran afoul of state law. This wasn't sloppy administration. It was deliberate legal fakery meant to create fake enforcement power. Whoever helped draft those notices knew enough legalese to make the threat sound real, and those letters sent to my mortgage company used the kind of language a volunteer wouldn't normally pull together. Someone with legal savvy was behind it, someone who understood how to weaponize lender triggers and lien threats. Judy sat in on the hearing and kept a sharp list of procedural errors, missing notice periods, wrong quorum counts, votes taken without proper process. They're violating their own bylaws, she whispered between pages. Her notes became a parallel record, an objective check on the charade Patricia was running. Having an eyewitness who could call out the mechanics of the sham made all the difference. Tom Bradford showed up too, sitting stiffly in the back like a well-dressed threat. He never spoke loudly, just nodded when Patricia made aggressive claims. His presence was theater, the kind of subtle intimidation that says, "This is supported by money and muscle," without actually displaying either. Once I matched his name to property records, the pattern was clear. He and Patricia were part of a larger acquisition play. After the hearing, Leonard pulled me aside in the parking lot and finally let the truth out. He admitted Patricia had promised him consulting work, a small paycheck if he helped carry out the enforcement routine. He'd lost his security job months ago, and the money sounded like salvation. He wasn't a villain. He was a frightened man being offered a lifeline. That confession confirmed my worst suspicions. Patricia was exploiting people's vulnerabilities to build her case against me. She'd also been actively discouraging anyone from hiring real counsel, framing legal advice as escalating tensions, and pushing for neighborhood mediation instead. It wasn't about saving time or money. It was about keeping me from getting a lawyer who would instantly see through the fake documents and expose the whole operation. Patricia's loudest claims even hinted at municipal backing, as if she had joint enforcement, authority with city compliance, language she had no right to use. Those were bold, calculated lies meant to make her harassment feel official. All the while, I kept cataloging every misstep: procedural violations, authentication problems, fabricated authority claims. Each entry in my growing file felt like another nail in the coffin of her scheme. My background in investigations was finally paying dividends. The hearing that was supposed to intimidate me was becoming the source of the evidence I needed. Then, during a normal weekend visit, my son changed the game. He reached into his wallet, showed me his sheriff's badge, number 4287, and said he'd been quietly analyzing everything I'd collected. He told me what I already suspected, but needed to hear from someone in uniform. This wasn't garden variety HOA drama. It was organized criminal behavior, and it belonged in a law enforcement investigation. My son, Marcus, 28, the one who helped on weekends between rotating shifts, wasn't just my handyman. He was a county deputy who had quietly been documenting Patricia's campaign from the moment the harassment escalated. He told me he'd asked for a local assignment so he could use his training and authority to build a prosecution grade evidence file. "Dad," he said, flipping open his badge, number 4287, "this isn't neighbor drama. It's criminal. The way you've been saving timestamps, voicemails, and photos? That's good. Now we add chain of custody, witness statements, and surveillance that a prosecutor can use." Suddenly, everything we'd been doing made sense as part of a coordinated investigation. Marcus skimmed the bylaws, closed the folder, and didn't sugarcoat it. The powers Patricia was claiming weren't in the originals, and they violated state law. He explained that Patricia's hurried timetable probably came from sensing resistance and trying to accelerate her plan. And, as Marcus put it bluntly, criminals get sloppy when they feel cornered. Her desperation would be our opportunity. Marcus watched Leonard closely and identified the stress signs I'd noticed. Trembling hands, inconsistent accounts, eyes that kept darting away. "He's being coerced," Marcus said. "Coerced witnesses often flip once they realize they're part of a crime." Leonard's discomfort made him a potential ally, not just another enforcer. Marcus brought in equipment far beyond my little camera kit, professional law enforcement grade systems to log trespass, tampering, and unauthorized access with evidentiary quality. "We need admissible footage," he said as he mounted motion-activated cameras with night vision around the property. He explained how Judy's classroom training in spotting systematic abuse would make her testimony especially valuable to prosecutors, and why formal witness statements from neighbors could corroborate the pattern of manipulation. Tom Bradford's pressure on Patricia, Marcus noted, was actually working in our favor. When business partners start arguing about missed deadlines, they panic, and panicked people make mistakes that leave a trail. Leonard eventually confirmed what Marcus needed to hear. Patricia had hired actors to impersonate officers, using costume rentals and forged paperwork timed for maximum shock during early morning visits. "That's why we prepare," Marcus told me. "When those fake cops show up, we'll have everything in place." We set an evidence trap, synchronized recording systems, coordinated witness positions, documented chain of custody procedures. We weren't just defending the house anymore. We were building an airtight case to expose the whole operation and protect other neighbors. The next morning at 6 a.m., just as Leonard had warned, someone pounded on the door with the kind of force meant to terrify. Two men in police-style uniforms stood on my porch, badges and official-looking paperwork in hand, shouting through the door, "Police! Open immediately for community violation enforcement. You have 24 hours to vacate or face arrest for continued violation of municipal ordinances." The false authority in their voices was designed to terrify any average homeowner would have folded. What they didn't know was that Marcus and I had everything set. Cameras were live, witnesses were in position, and the chain of custody plan we'd rehearsed was ready to go. Marcus moved to the door first, badge gleaming in his county uniform. I stayed behind the equipment, rolling. "County Sheriff's Department, step back and identify yourselves," he ordered, cold and calm. The switch on those imposters' faces was instant. Aggressive swagger vanished. They went from threatening to visibly panicked in less than 2 seconds. He keyed his radio and logged the call to dispatch, locking the scene into an official record in under a minute. "Dispatch, Deputy Mitchell reporting suspected impersonation at my location. Requesting immediate backup and verification of any warrants," he announced, never taking his eyes off the nervous man. The professional procedure created an airtight legal timeline, exactly what we needed. When Marcus inspected their paperwork, the fraud was obvious. The county seal was wrong, the case numbers made no sense, and the patrol vehicle in the driveway was a rental with bolt-on emergency lights. Their badges were cheap reproductions. "These documents are fabricated," Marcus said clearly, loud enough for our cameras and every neighbor to hear. "You're wearing costume uniforms and attempting to enforce non-existent ordinances." Patricia, who tried to stay hidden, watched from her car, expecting a breakdown, not an arrest. Instead, she watched her scheme collapse. Her smugness evaporated as real law enforcement exposed the fakery. Tom Bradford, who'd been sitting quietly at the back of the hall like a menacing investor, bolted the moment he realized the situation had turned criminal. He sped away so fast he left tire marks on the street, abandoning Patricia and the hired actors as panic spread through the driveway. Neighbors streamed outside, recording on their phones, stunned at what was unfolding. Many admitted they had no idea they'd been manipulated into signing complaints. "I thought I was just reporting a nuisance," one neighbor told Marcus, eyes downcast. As the scene unfolded, Leonard broke down and began to cooperate. He confessed on camera that Patricia had promised him consulting work and a slice of any future profits if he helped enforce the bogus citations. His voice shook as he explained he'd been desperate for money after losing his job, and that he hadn't known the plan was criminal. His statement was exactly the corroboration we needed. The imposters tried to flee, tossing fake badges and uniforms as they ran. Marcus kept control of the scene, calling for backup and directing officers to secure discarded evidence, fake warrants, rental receipts, costume IDs, all of which tied the scheme together. "You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement, conspiracy, and attempted extortion," he said as he read them their rights and applied handcuffs with practiced efficiency. Our research on property values gave the whole operation a motive. The corner lot's commercial rezoning would transform a $320,000 parcel into a multi-million-dollar asset. That potential payoff explained the escalation from petty citations to stage sabotage and, finally, to criminal impersonation. Once the fake cops were in custody and Leonard's confession was recorded, the picture was clear. Patricia and her partners had engineered a pressure campaign to force a quick sale at residential prices. Judy's testimony about the pattern of manipulation became a critical piece of the prosecution package. Her classroom-trained observations about repeated phrasing and coordinated complaints added independent verification that this was not isolated harassment but a systematic campaign affecting multiple households. With neighbors willing to testify and with physical evidence and recorded confessions, the case had weight. Marcus coordinated with the county prosecutor to make sure every piece of evidence was handled to legal standards. Asset protection orders were obtained immediately to keep Patricia from touching the property or continuing the harassment while charges were filed. In short order, the county moved to protect my ownership rights so the 6-month rezoning timetable would pass without Patricia being able to leverage it for profit. Watching Patricia's empire unravel felt surreal. The arrest photos and story hit local news quickly. The combination of suburban drama, impersonation, and alleged property fraud was irresistible to reporters. Media coverage spread through the county, exposing the depth of the scheme and leaving Patricia's professional reputation in tatters. Her real estate license, once a tool for research and access, suddenly became public record tied to criminal allegations. By the time the legal wheels started turning, the neighborhood had shifted. People who'd once avoided me came forward to apologize and to offer statements about how they'd been recruited into the pressure campaign. Leonard's cooperation, Judy's detailed notes, Marcus's surveillance footage and the discarded fake credentials formed a prosecution-ready narrative. Impersonation, extortion, conspiracy, a planned operation, not a spat between neighbors. As officers led the imposters away and Marcus secured the scene. It was clear this was only the beginning of a long legal process. But for the first time in months, the pressure eased. The immediate threat to my home had been neutralized, and what had started as a campaign of intimidation was now a criminal investigation, with real consequences for those responsible. Patricia's mugshot was suddenly everywhere, on evening news segments and across local news websites, and the fallout was immediate. Her real estate license was pulled pending the investigation. Business partners cut ties, and professional groups moved to review and sever any association with her. The crime she was accused of made it impossible for her to keep working in the industry, and anyone tied to her schemes suddenly faced liability exposure. Investigation quickly widened to include Tom Bradford's company. Prosecutors began probing possible conspiracy ties, and Bradford's development operation found itself under intense scrutiny. Before long, 3 other families came forward with virtually identical stories. The Johnsons, the Hendersons, and Maria Santos, each one describing the same template complaints: staged pressure and financial intimidation aimed at forcing below-market sales. Those matching accounts shifted the case from a single harassment dispute into a pattern of organized criminal conduct. Neighbors who'd signed Patricia's form letters were forced to confront what they'd unwittingly supported. Many were contrite and volunteered to testify about how they'd been coached to complain. Under the guise of community safety, Leonard's full cooperation proved pivotal. His recorded admission detailed Patricia's methods, how she dangled consulting income to secure his help, and how the pressure campaign was coordinated. In exchange for truthful testimony, prosecutors offered him immunity, a trade that strengthened the prosecution's case against the ringleaders. The probe uncovered disturbing patterns in Bradford's business model, targeting homeowners during vulnerable life events, divorce, illness, financial strain, in neighborhoods slated for rezoning. Then using manufactured complaints and intimidation to push quick sales at low prices before flipping the land for commercial profit. That systematic approach exposed an enterprise-level scheme rather than a handful of bad decisions. Courts moved quickly to protect victims. Asset protection orders froze attempts to interfere with ownership and blocked any effort to capitalize on the scheme during the prosecution. Those orders, combined with emergency legal safeguards, ensured homeowners kept their property while charges advanced. Public records and media forensics revealed that Patricia had attended planning meetings and used her real estate access and MLS research to identify high-value targets, turning legitimate professional tools into instruments of fraud. As a result, licensing boards and professional associations opened disciplinary reviews that threatened to permanently end her career. At the neighborhood level, reforms followed fast. New HOA bylaws demanded transparency, recorded meetings, legal oversight, and anti-harassment safeguards to stop anyone from weaponizing association power for personal gain. Judy stepped up to lead educational efforts and support networks, helping residents learn how to spot and resist predatory tactics. Regional media ran forensic pieces on the campaign's coordination, the templated complaints, the timing of social posts, and the digital manipulation, turning our experience into a cautionary case study other communities could learn from. Law enforcement publicly commended the methodical documentation Marcus and I had compiled. Prosecutors noted the unusually strong evidence package that made prosecution viable. What began as a terrifying targeted harassment effort had, through careful investigation and community response, become a model for how neighborhoods can expose and stop predatory real estate schemes. My insurance investigation background had built documentation standards far beyond what most civilians could manage. And soon, the case was being used as a training model for both law enforcement and community protection programs. Our systematic evidence-gathering approach was recognized as a blueprint for fighting property fraud. Civil lawsuits brought victim compensation, covering harassment damages, legal fees, and emotional distress, helping families recover from Patricia's long campaign of intimidation. Criminal asset seizures funded victim assistance programs and ensured her crimes would never turn a profit. The restitution and ongoing support programs gave real closure to families who had been targeted. At sentencing, Patricia was handed 3 years in state prison for conspiracy, harassment, fraud, and extortion. Tom Bradford received 2 years for conspiracy and business fraud. Leonard, who had cooperated fully, was granted probation and assigned to community service focused on harassment prevention. The court also ordered complete forfeiture of their fraudulent assets, redirecting over $340,000 into victim compensation and community protection initiatives. The very doorstep where Patricia's fake police intimidation had collapsed became the stage for symbolic justice. Judge Harrison signed the final settlement papers at my front porch, with Marcus, now in uniform, standing by. That moment, witnessed by the media, transformed a place of attempted fear into a landmark of accountability and community strength. With new HOA bylaws, transparency rules, and harassment prevention standards, the community had rebuilt itself stronger than ever. Judy was elected to the board, leading education programs on harassment recognition and prevention. The Victim Assistance Foundation, created from seized assets, now provided legal help and community protection resources across the county. Even Leonard found redemption. Once manipulated into helping Patricia, he was now an advocate, warning others about predatory schemes. Judy expanded her teaching expertise into regional prevention networks. Marcus continued his law enforcement leadership, and together, our community built a permanent shield against schemes like Patricia's. The story closed exactly where it had begun, on my doorstep. A place where fake cops once tried to steal my home had become a symbol of victory, empowerment, and justice. A reminder that while intimidation may come knocking, real accountability always answers louder. And that's what we do here on Listen HOA Stories. Share the real battles, the real scams, and the real justice that shows communities can fight back and win. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Listen HOA Stories, where every case proves that no HOA bully or property scammer is too big to fall.